How does changing your avatar's appearance change your in-game behavior? So a few weeks ago, the game Rust randomly assigned races to players' avatars. Your avatar's race is now tied to your Steam ID, meaning that it can't be changed.
Everyone now has a pseudo-unique skin tone and face, and just like in real life, this is something you can't change.
This upset some players. Sounds like a cheap way to get publicity for the game, complained one commenter somewhere. Another said, not sure why they'd lock in your appearance. Ironically, people are complaining about how race works in real life. It's an immutable trait. You have no say in it being assigned to you. And Rust is hoping this virtual change will give players a better understanding of the offline world. Rust lead Gary Newman said, "I would love nothing more than if playing a black guy in a game made a white guy appreciate what it was like to be a persecuted minority." Now that's an interesting idea, but can it actually play out in a game world? Because your race in a game, like everything else, is still just pixels on the screen. Why couldn't you continue playing the game however you want to play the game?
You no longer have to be a white naked male.
So let's take a closer look. Does the way your avatar appear affect your in-game behavior?
I'm about to starve to death anyway, so it don't matter.
To answer this question, let's start by looking at your relationship with your avatar. Your avatar is neither completely dependent or completely independent. It exists somewhere in between. And if you want to know more about this phenomenon, check out Mike's Idea Channel video on the subject. But what matters here is that your avatar offers you a degree of mediated agency in game worlds, and this push and pull fascinates psychologists. They have two big theories to explain this relationship. The first is called social perception theory. It's been around since the 1970s. It says that we learn about ourselves by studying our outward appearance. So if you see yourself smiling, you may suddenly feel happier, or a frown can make you feel sad. The psychologist Daryl Bem, who came up with the social perception theory, explained it this way. The individual is in functionally the same position as an outside observer. This theory got researchers thinking about how we interact with images of ourselves. If seeing yourself in a mirror can change your outlook, what could your avatar do? That's where video game researcher Nick Yee comes into the picture. He took up this question in a book called The Proteus Paradox. The paradox is that there's almost an infinite number of possibilities within games, but players' behaviors tend to cluster into patterns reminiscent of the offline world. Why? Yee sees this as proof that we bring our lived experiences into games and project them onto game worlds. This idea can be used to experiment with in-game behavior. In one test, Yee found that people with taller avatars are more aggressive in negotiations. In another experiment, he found that more attractive avatars will share more with strangers. Yee says we conform to the expected behaviors and attitudes of our avatars. This idea of living up to your avatar is what he calls the Proteus Effect. And other researchers have also found proof of the Proteus Effect. At UC Davis, for example, they found that giving you an overweight avatar in a tennis video game will cause you to move your character less vigorously. The study's author, Jorge Pena, explains, people get so immersed when playing video games that the virtual self momentarily becomes more salient and influential on behavior than our real self. So what we have here is a very powerful feedback loop. You look to your avatar's appearance for clues as to how to behave and interpret those clues using your conscious and unconscious preconceptions. Avatar's design really does affect how you behave in games. But what about race? Rust isn't just tweaking player height, they're assigning races. Well, there are limits to how much race's impact on in-game behavior has been studied, but there is some evidence to suggest that our unconscious biases could end up being reinforced by games. A 2009 study found that 30% of white Americans believe that black Americans are more violent than their white counterparts. This fear is disconnected from reality, but that doesn't change the fact that it exists. And researchers have found some evidence that changing your avatar's race can make some players live out these stereotypes. One study divided participants between GTA 3, which has a violent white lead, and GTA San Andreas, which has a stereotypically violent African American lead. After 15 minutes, players were asked to associate races with positive and negative qualities. You can probably see where this is going. The experiment didn't change the views of white participants. They were quick to associate African Americans with aggression, no matter which race they played as. But African American players were much slower to connect race with aggression if they had played with the white lead. The study's author, Nathan Cirillo, explains, stereotypes can potentially cause heightened activation impacting post-game play measures, meaning games can reinforce our unequal status quo.
Gangster. I'm already gangster in this game. Check me out. What's up?
And maybe that isn't a rare case after all. Ohio State researchers randomly assigned black and white avatars to white players in Saints Row 2, WWE SmackDown vs. Raw 2002, and Fight Night Round 4. In all 3 games, players with black avatars came away likelier to associate black faces with violence. Brad Bushman, the study's co-author, says, playing a violent video game as a black character reinforces harmful stereotypes that blacks are violent. So the results are mixed, just like me. Changing the race of your avatar can have an effect, but not all of the time, and not always by a lot. What should we make of the research into avatar race and human behavior, and how should that influence our thinking about Rust's racialized future? So there are 3 things. First, avatars have a lot more power over us than we give them credit for. Changing their characteristics can change our behavior, and we're a lot less in control of our relationships with our avatars than we might think. But there are also things that we don't know about how avatars affect us. That's the second thing. Research about changes in avatar race is far from conclusive. Studies involve samples of only a few hundred people. Rust, on the other hand, has sold 7 million copies. We can't really know what comes next. The last thing is that what we do know is that our virtual lives are not completely walled off from our daily experiences. We bring our baggage to video games whether we realize it or not. So Rust's newly racialized society will give players a chance to experience new realities, but they won't only be walking in the shoes of others. They'll be walking in the shoes of their own subconscious. So what do you think? Does your avatar's appearance or even your avatar's race affect how you behave inside of games or even outside of them too? Hash it out in the comments, and if you like what you saw, please subscribe. Oh, and you should absolutely check out all the important studies we've mentioned in the episode if you're curious or just skeptical. We've linked to them in the description below. I'll see y'all next week. Last week, we talked about why you'll always lose at Tetris. Let's see what you had to say. Notorious White Moth takes issue with the idea of winning, specifically that Tetris doesn't have the same kind of win conditions that a game like Super Mario Bros. Does. There's no bosses, there's no levels, there's no the end sequence. What I was alluding to is this idea that Tetris avoids being what's known as a solved game. So a game like checkers or a game like tic-tac-toe, those are solvable. There's optimal strategies there that you can engage in every single time that will, most of the time, it would result in a win or, worst case scenario, a draw. Tetris, despite its simplicity, avoids being placed in that category, and that's what I find ultimately so fascinating, that you can play Tetris as best as humanly possible, but all games basically end with you losing, and that's what's really interesting. Eric Q left a great, amazing comment. I will link to it in the description. Eric Q points out something that I had not thought about for the game of Tetris, which is that each individual grid, not necessarily the whole Tetris piece, but the little square grid, can only exist in one of 2 conditions. Either it's filled or it's empty, and your job is to basically operate between those 2 poles, between things being completely filled or things being completely empty. It actually alludes to something that we talked about back in our killing episode, where we talked about the mechanic of killing, simply that killing is very appealing to game designers, or this idea of existing or non-existing is appealing because it sort of reflects this base reality of working with computers, 1s and 0s. And I think Tetris is a beautiful reflection of that reality as well. Neko Vermillion has a slight amendment to my analogy that the SZ sequence, the snake sequence in Tetris, the deadly one that I talked about that ends every single game, is like the 7-10 split in bowling. Only because, as Neko points out, the 7-10 split in bowling is not the hardest split. There's actually something called the Greek Church. You can look it up online. It's the 4, 6, 7, 8, 10 arrangement of pins, and apparently it's beatable like 0.3% of the time. So I appreciate the amendment. I guess if you got 1 SZ sequence, that's like getting a 7-10 split. But if you got 4 in a row in Tetris, that would be like this Greek Church thing. So yeah, I'll have to check that out next time I go bowling. And finally, before we go, a little piece of errata. Vanko points out that Georg Cantor, the mathematician that I quoted at the end of the episode, is in fact German, not Russian. Sorry, just with Tetris, we were thinking a lot about Russia at the time. So anyway, thank you so much. Sorry about that.